Today we're going to learn Pesachim, Daf Kafeh. Today's daf is sponsored by Bini Shalev in memory of his mother, Nechi Shadavsky, Nacha Dvora Bat Sara Gittel v'Yosef Zichrona Levracha. Okay, we ended yesterday toward the bottom, about 8 lines from the bottom, or maybe 9, with the words of Abaye. Abaye had said, everyone agrees, we were talking about Isurei Hana'ah. That's been our main topic for a few pages. We've been talking about the fact that it is forbidden to get benefit from chametz on Pesach. From there, we started talking about all sorts of isurei hana'ah. And then we said yesterday there were these two lashonot of Rabbi Avau about whether it's forbidden to, when we say forbidden to benefit, we mean though it has to be in the normal way that things are eaten. So if they're not eaten in a typical way, then we're not obligated if we eat them in that way. Or a second one, which meant not eating in a normal way and not benefiting, any kind of benefit. If you use it in an atypical manner, you won't be obligated. But Abaye comes and says there's one exception to the rule, and that's kilei kerem. That's when you plant seeds right next to a vineyard. So he says, Hakol modim b'kilei kerem, I'm going to repeat this again, shelokin alehen afilu shelo kederach hanatan. You will get lashes for this, even if you use it in an atypical manner. I want to point out one thing here. What we said yesterday is you don't get lashes for it. Now, it might not mean it's allowed. There's a distinction always between sometimes something can be forbidden and you don't get punished for it. That's possible. So when we say, since by all the other things it says lo tochal, tochal has to include either a typical way, again, depending on which variation of Rabbi Avau you go, either a typical way of eating them or a typical way of using them, benefiting from them. So that would include everything, right? It's a little bit like Patur v'Asur, but not really. Patur v'Asur means, I was actually thinking about saying this, so I'm glad you asked. Patur v'Asur, that we learned all over Masechet Shabbat, means you're exempt by Torah law, but by rabbinic law, it's prohibited. This perhaps doesn't mean that by the Torah it's permitted, but the rabbis forbade, which is maybe one possibility. But another is saying the Torah forbade it, but only when there's a lo ta'aseh, a negative commandment, are you allowed to get lashes. In other words, can the court administer lashes? So what we're going to say here is when it says lo tochelu, it includes any kind of benefit, and even a benefit that's atypical. But that's not really included in the words lo tochelu. That's kind of an extra thing that is, yes, part of the prohibition, but not part of the words lo tochelu. And only because of lo tochelu do you get lashes. So it's a little bit different. Although maybe there's a suggestion, I didn't look, that maybe it's because it's only forbidden by rabbinic law, but I'm not sure. In any case, that's an aside. Let's stick with our main thing. So he says, kilei kerem, you get lashes, even shelo kederach hanatan, my time mishum delo ktiv behu achila. It never says achila. Only when it says achila do we assume then typical way of eating, typical way of benefiting. But if it doesn't say lo tochlu, where kilei kerem, what's the forbid? It's forbidden to plant. Then, because it's forbidden to plant, it also becomes forbidden to benefit from. But really, the isur is not to plant. So now they bring a meitive, and it's a bit of a long source. That's why I didn't start it yesterday. Isi ben Yehuda Omer, minayin lebasar b'chalav shu asur. Before we even start, I want to give you a bit of a structure. We're going to have a kal v'chomer, which we know. Kal v'chomer means we have something that's easy, and yet it has a strict law. So something that's more strict is going to obviously have that law. But if you can knock it out, a kal v'chomer, by saying, wait, but that thing that you called kal, lenient, actually has a stringency to it. So that knocks out the kal v'chomer. However, we've seen this, and this time it usually has more words to it, like bameh hatzad, and what's the common denominator between these two things. Ours doesn't exactly say that, but the meaning is really like that, which is if we have a few things and each one maybe has a stringency to it, but it also has a leniency to it, and that stringency doesn't appear among the others, shows that that's not the stringency that causes this law. So it's kind of like it cancels out and we end up with the least common denominator. And since these all three are lenient in some way and they have that law, then we can apply that law somewhere else. So that's the whole intro to the structure. So we start off with a very famous question. Minayin lebasar b'chalav shu asur. How do we know that milk and meat? Now this is a great question because I'll ask any of you, are you allowed to eat milk and meat? And you'll all say, absolutely not. You can't eat milk and meat that were cooked together. But if you remember the verse in the Torah, and there's 3 times where it's mentioned, all 3 times it says, lo tivashel gedi b'chalev imo, which means don't cook a goat right, in its mother's milk. So now that seems to indicate, forget about gedi and mother's milk, and okay, but we'll leave that for right now. Lo tevashel, the isur, 3 times it was mentioned, is all don't cook. So how do we get to the fact that you can't eat it? It sounds like it's only forbidden to cook. The famous drasha is the one that says, 3 times, one for bishul, one for achila, for eating, and one for hana'ah. But that's not the drasha we're going to see today. There's a bunch of different drashot for where they get to this. It's a good example of something that you grow up thinking is just obvious, isn't always so obvious. Number one, it's not so obvious that the Torah even forbids eating it. That's number one. Number two, even the drasha that you thought was obvious that everyone agrees about isn't really it's not the only drasha there is. So you're going to be a little surprised by this one because I doubt you've really heard of it. So how do we know it's forbidden to eat? Ne'emar kan ki am kadosh ata. Okay, what verse is this? This is the verse by Treifa. Remember, we had that a few days ago. Basar b'sadeh Treifa. Okay, I have to pull it up. My edition of my Gemara doesn't have the Torah or in it. Okay, so now, sorry, up. Anshe kodesh tiyunli. Okay, be people of kodesh, holy people. And what does this mean in the verse? Okay, this is Shmo Kaftet Pasuk Lamed. Ubasar b'sadeh treifa lo tochelu. And don't eat meat, a treifa meat, that's you find in the field. Remember, we had all sorts of explanations. La kelev tashlichunoto. So first thing to note is that this is the verse that talks about treifa, okay? And it says it's forbidden to eat, but you can benefit, okay? Which is interesting that that's what we're learning it from, because we know ultimately we're going to get to that basar b'chalav you also can't benefit from, even though they're learning it from the treifa. So how do we get from here to basar b'chalav? Because it says ki am kadosh ata v'ne'amar. That's where it says it in basar b'chalav. That's part of the verse lo tavashel gdi b'chalev imo. V'anshe kodesh tiyunli, and by the treifa it says you should be for me holy people. Ma lahalan asul af kan asul. So since kodesh is in both places, this is what we call a gzera shava. We make a comparison based on the same word appearing in both places. So they say, okay, so therefore, since their kodesh meant don't eat, also by basar v'chalav, kodesh means don't eat. Okay, that ainli ela b'achila. So that got us to isur achila, and it didn't get us to isur hana'ah because basar b'sadeh treifa is permitted to benefit from. So, because la kelev tashlichunoto, remember? So b'hana'ah minayin. So where do we get that it's forbidden b'hana'ah? And for this, we're going to need our kal v'chomer. Amart kal v'chomer. You can say it's a kal v'chomer. So now this is going to start a long process. Basar uma orla shelo ne'evda ba'avera asura b'hana'ah. Basar b'chalav shenevda b'avera eino din she'asur b'hana'ah. Orla, what's orla? You plant a tree. Now, is it forbidden to plant a tree? Of course not. It's actually good to plant a tree. You plant a tree. The first 3 years you can't eat it and you can't benefit. So what do we see here? You take something that you haven't even done anything wrong and yet you can't benefit. So all the more so now the assumption is you're eating basar b'chalav that you cooked together, or at least somebody cooked together. So an avera was done to this because they were cooked together. Okay, from Torah law, it's not forbidden to put milk together with meat and eat it together not cooked. Okay, just so you know. Don't try it at home, but it's not forbidden by Torah law. So the assumption here is somebody cooked it, which was for sure forbidden. And then, eino din she'asur b'hana'ah, so all the more so, right? Kal v'chomer. If orla, nothing wrong was done to it, and yet it's forbidden to benefit from, all the more so, here it should be forbidden to benefit. Ma orla shekain lo hayta lashata kosher. But wait, orla has a stringency. What's the stringency? It was never permitted. In other words, until it gets past the 3 years. But from the moment you planted it and a fruit grew, you couldn't eat that fruit. Whereas basar b'chalav, before you cooked it, the meat could have been eaten and the milk could have been eaten separately. So here you're taking something, which is kind of like we talked about by chametz b'Pesach, something that used to be permitted and now it's not permitted. So because of that, we say orla has a stringency because it's true it's got a leniency that it was nothing wrong was done to it. On the other hand, it was never ever permitted. So then you could say because it was never permitted, maybe that's why it's forbidden to benefit from. But then you can't learn from there to milk and meat. So tomar b'basal. Now remember this word tomar because we're going to come back to it later. The structure is here we come and we say, isn't there a stringency here that doesn't appear by basar b'chalav? So mala orla shekain hayta lashata kosher Tomar b'basar b'chalav shaita lo shata kosher. But you can say that by basar b'chalav, this did have a shata kosher, which means that orla is more strict than basar b'chalav, in which case we can't learn a kal v'chomer. But comes the Braita and it says, chametz b'pesach yochiach. But chametz on Pesach will prove the point that what? Now, this is where I kind of set it up earlier so you'd see the structure, that this stringency of orla, shelo hayta la shata kosher, is not a stringency that because of that, we're going to make things forbidden to benefit from. Because look at chametz b'pesach. Chametz b'pesach doesn't, that's why it says yochiach, it will prove. It will prove that that stringency is not the thing that's tipping us over the edge that's causing the isur hana'ah, the forbidden to benefit. Why? Because hayalo shata kosher v'asur b'hana'ah, because look at chametz b'pesach. Yesterday, you could eat it. Today, it's Erev Pesach, you can't, or it's Pesach, you can't. So, and what do you know about chametz b'pesach? Despite the fact that it did have a shata kosher, it was able to be eaten at some point. At this point, it's not, and it's asur b'hana'ah. So what do you see? That's not the issue. So we can knock off that as a stringency by orla. So between orla and chametz b'pesach, we can learn that basar b'chalav is forbidden b'hana'ah. But we're not finished yet. Ma lechametz b'pesach, but wait, chametz b'pesach has a stringency, as we all know. We started with this in the Masechet. Sheken anush karet. You get karet for it. So it's super serious, super stringent. So you can't say that. You could say, tomar b'basar b'chalav she'eno anush karet. But wait, we have orla, didn't have shata kosher, and chametz b'pesach does, but chametz b'pesach has another stringency. So maybe because of that stringency, that's what makes it asur b'hana'ah, and not because hayalo shata kosher and it's lenient, and yet we make it forbidden to benefit from. So what do they say? And obviously basar b'chalav, you don't get karet for it. Okay, it's not karet. Kil'ea kerem yochichu. So now they say, wait, let's take a third, and we'll learn it from the three, the least common denominator between the three. Kil'ea kerem will prove she'en anush karet v'asur b'hana'ah. Kil'ea kerem, our case, right, where you crossbreed crops, it will prove it because there's no karet, and yet it's forbidden to benefit from. So here you see, and it doesn't have the other leniencies as the others. So therefore, we see that here we have kil'ea kerem together with chametz b'pesach, together with orla. We can learn that since all three of those are forbidden b'hana'ah, and even though some might have a stringency, those stringencies don't appear in the others. So again, that means that's not the stringency that causes benefit to be forbidden, and therefore we prove that we're good, right? We can learn that kil'ea kerem, the basar b'chalav is forbidden to benefit from, okay, from the combination of the three. Now, who can remember why we brought this? So remember what Abaye said. Abaye said that everyone agrees that b'kil'ea kerem, now I'll say it in the words that we need for our purposes, there's a stringency that doesn't appear by everything else. What's that stringency? That you're going to get lashes even if you use it not in its typical manner. So if that really was a stringency, comes the questioner to ask Abaye, im ita, if that's really the case, okay, I'm now reading from the 8th line on the page, nifroch, they should have knocked out the kal v'chomer by saying, ma lekil'ea kerem sheken lokin alehen afilu shelo kederach hanatan. You could have said, hey, kil'ea kerem has its own stringency. So why didn't it say that? Didn't say that. Must be because it doesn't, right? Because that's not true, Abaye. So now here I told you, pay attention to the words tomal, because now Abaye is going to say, tomal b'mai. Abaye says, here's his answer. He says, what would you have expected the Braita to look like? It would have said, ma lekil'ea kerem sheken lokin alehen, tomar b'basar v'chalav. Now you'd have to, what would you fill in the blank? You'd say by basar b'chalav that it's going to be forbidden, even that it's going to be permitted shelo kederach hanatan, just like everything else, right? So that's what he's going to say. Tomar b'mai, tomar b'basar b'chalav she'ein lokin alav ela derech hanato, right? You're going to say the stringency that appears in kil'ea kerem, that you're going to get lashes even if you use in an atypical manner. You're going to say, but that doesn't, it's not true by basar b'chalav, because by basar b'chalav, you're not going to get lashes unless you use it in its typical manner. That would be the continuation of your sentence, Abaye says. What's the problem with that, according to Abaye? Well, remember what Abaye's logic was. Kil'ea kerem, you get lashes even shelo kederach hanatan. Why is that? Because it never says don't eat. Because it doesn't say don't eat, eat means use in its typical way, right? But if it didn't say don't eat and it's forbidden to benefit, it sounds like the fact that it's forbidden to benefit is across the board. So comes Abaye very smart, and he's in a very smart manner, and he says, but atu bebasar b'chalav achila k'tive be? Also by basar v'chalav, that was where we started. The word achila doesn't appear. It doesn't say don't eat. If it doesn't say don't eat, then what does that seem to indicate? That it's going to be forbidden no matter what, even if you use it in an atypical manner, which would mean what? That you can't finish your sentence if you wanted to add this as a stringency that appears by kilei akarim and not by basar b'chalav, because that same stringency, according to Abaye, would be applicable also to basar b'chalav, because he would basically say anytime it doesn't say don't eat, which basar b'chalav falls into that category, it's not going to, this whole issue is not going to be relevant, meaning you're going to get lashes even if you use it in an atypical manner, because there was no reference to food eating benefit. Now, the one who questioned him, what was he thinking? Because this sounds like a good retort. So idach, and we're basically going to say that Abaye and the person questioning him disagreed about this halacha by basar b'chalav. Abaye thinks that whatever he said for kilei akarim would be true for basar b'chalav, that you're going to get lashes even if you use it in an atypical manner. The person who questioned didn't think so. And now we'll see why. The idach right now, we've proven Abaye, because Abaye basically says if it doesn't say isur achila, then it must not, right? Even though we derive in both cases that it's going to be forbidden to eat and forbidden to benefit, but we don't, right? We won't apply it, right, to this derech hana'ah. So in other words, it'll be across the board. So idach, the one who questioned him, Saval, he held, Lahachi kagamar minavela. Where did we start today with basar b'chalav? We started with saying, where do we derive it from? The pasuk about treifa. Remember? They call it nevela here, but it's really the pasuk about treifa. So therefore, he learns it from treifa. Ma nevela derech hana'ata, af basar b'chalav derech hana'ato. Since the isur achila is derived from the pasuk about treifa, therefore we're going to assume what? That the fact that basar b'chalav is forbidden to benefit from is going to be forbidden to benefit in the same exact way that treifa is forbidden, which means again, here it's not going to be benefit because that's not even forbidden to benefit. But we're going to say that the isur achila is only if you eat it in its typical manner. Okay, then you're going to be obligated. So since they learn it from there, ma nevela derech hana'ata, since nevela, or really treifa there, is going to be forbidden only in a normal way that you eat it, af basar v'chalav derech hana'ato. And Abaye is going to respond to that by saying, Lahachi lo katav achila begufo, lo mar shelo kina lav afilu shelo kederech hana'ato. He says, no, the Torah, it's true they derived it from treifa, but they could have simply said, don't eat basar b'chalav. The fact that they didn't say don't eat must be to teach you that you're going to be obligated in any way you use it, even if it's an atypical way. So that's the debate between the two of them, and that affects how they read this. Is this Braita a question on Abaye, or is it real? Right? Abaye doesn't even think it's a question because he thinks that kilei akarim and basar b'chalav have the same stringency, which means that you wouldn't be able to use that and say, oh, look, kilei akarim has this and basar b'chalav doesn't. Whereas the one who questioned thinks it's the halacha is different in each case. Okay, now we're going to get off on a tangent about this Braita. Okay, this Braita that we saw, we're now finished with Abaye and our question on Abaye, but now they're going to say you could have asked something else. The same way we said by orla, we could say also by kilei akarim, it never was able to be eaten because as soon as you plant it, it's forbidden. And that's going to really be the question. At what point does kilei akarim become forbidden? Is it the moment you plant it, or is it some later stage? So Amar Rav Ada bar Ava zot omeret, he's going to infer from the fact that the Braita didn't use that as a question must mean that it must have had a shata kosher. There must be a time when kilei akarim is permitted. What would that be? Kilei akarim ikaran ne'esarim ho'il v'aitalem shata kosher kodem hashchasha. He says, when are they forbidden? When they take root. So it means there is a time period in between the time you plant them to the time that they start to take root that it was able to be eaten. In other words, it doesn't become forbidden. I don't know exactly what you'll use it for, but maybe you could use it for something. But let's put that aside. The point is that the second that you plant them, they're not forbidden. You plant it, let's say you plant it and then unplant it, right? So it sounds like maybe you didn't do anything wrong. So the minute you plant them, it's not a problem. It becomes a problem once they start to take root. then you're chayav, and then they're going to be forbidden to benefit from. So now they're not exactly talking about the isur itself. I don't know if that would be true if you would plant it and then take it right out if you'd be obligated. But the point is that the isur hana'ah kicks in, the forbidden to benefit kicks in only once it takes root, which means that it did have a shat kosher, and that's why it didn't use that as a possible retort. But now we're going to have a question on that. Okay, we kind of sounded like maybe when you plant it, it's a problem. We said, no. It's not when you plant it, it's when it takes root. But now we're going to bring a different source, which actually says it's at a later stage, which is when it starts to grow. Okay, so then we're going to have to resolve that with what we just said, that it's when it takes root. Mativ Rav Shmaya. So he brings the following source to contradict. He says, Hama'avir atzitz nakuv. This is a favorite halachic category. It's a plant that has a hole in the bottom in the planter, right? Where if you put it on the ground, it will get nourishment from the ground through the hole, which means that it's as if it's attached to the ground. And if it didn't have a hole, then it would be something different. Okay, there's all sorts of relevant halachic issues about this. Right now, we're going to focus on this one. Hamavir atzitz nakuv bekerem. So you planted something in a planter, and then you moved it. Okay, maybe it was in the ground, maybe it was. It doesn't really matter. Then you moved it to right next to a vineyard, and now it's next to the vineyard and getting nourishment from the ground there. So that will be a problem of kilei akerem. So im hosif matayim asul. Now, when is it going to be forbidden? When it grows 1 out of 200th of what it is right now. Okay, let's say it's this size. Okay, so it'll grow 1 in 200th more than what it is now. Why is 1 in 200th the magic number? That's because, remember we talked about nullification and we said most things, right? According to Torah law, there's bitul barov, majority. Okay, then so things will be nullified if you put in the majority, right? If the majority is the heter, what's permitted, and the minority is the isur, that's by Torah law. The rabbis said, no, that's not good enough. Batel b'shishim, 60. So, right, your milk falls into your cholent pot. If there's 60 of meat to cancel out the milk, you're good. But if it's truma, remember we said it's more significant and it's 1 in 100. When it comes to kilei akerem, it's 1 in 200. Okay, you need a lot more to cancel it. So if it grows a little bit, less than 1 in 200th of what there is, whatever growth there is becomes nullified to whatever had already grown. Whereas once you get to 1 in 200th of growth of what it was, then already you're going to have 1 to 200, right? And it's not going to be canceled anymore. So it's not going to be nullified. Then you're going to have a problem. So what do you see here? But the main point is, forget about the 1 in 200th and all that. The point is hosif in lo hosif lo. Sounds like if it rooted more, that wouldn't make a difference. The issue is not the rooting. The issue is the growth. Okay, this now grew from the kilei akerem, and because of that, it's a problem. So Amar Rava says, wait, that's not a problem. This doesn't contradict what Rav Ada bar Ava said, which is when it takes root, the isur, right, it becomes forbidden to benefit from, because trei krai ktive. There's 2 different verses that are written, and ktiv. Okay, so now we're going to bring up a verse that's a bit of a difficult verse to understand what the pshat of this verse means. Okay, I'm going to read it inside. Lo tizra karmecha kilayim. Okay, don't plant your vineyard to be cross, don't plant your crops next to your vineyard. Pen tikdash hamalea hazera asher tizra utfuat hakerem. Okay, maybe I'll just read you the translation in the Koran of this pasuk because it's hard for me to translate this freely. You shall not sow your vineyard with 2 kinds of seed, lest the fullness of the seed which you have sown be forfeited together with the increase of the vineyard. Okay. The main issue that they're going to focus on is, it says hamalea, which is fullness, which sounds like growth, and it says hazera, the seed. So that sounds like it's saying both the seed is a problem and the fullness is a problem, the growth is a problem. So now we're going to say, how do those 2 work together? It doesn't really make much sense. So they say, right, ha-ketzad, how can you have it, the zera, the planting is an issue, and how can you also have it at the same time, the fullness is an issue? It's either one or the other. So they say, no, how are we going to explain them both? Zarua me'ikaro b'hashrasha. Zarua uba hosif in lo hosif lo. We're comparing 2 cases that are not exactly comparable. One was we took a plant that was already planted. The seed was planted, and we just moved it and we put it in a vineyard. That's what we call zarua uba. That was already planted, and now we're just putting it down in the ground here. Then you need increase of growth. But zarua me'ikaro, but if you're planting it in the ground from the start, then it's going to be bahashrasha. And that was what we were talking about previously. So they basically say these are two different cases, and it depends on what stage, and they derive it from the first, which relates to both the planting and the fullness, the growth. Okay, back to our topic. What's our topic? Isurei hana'an. From here, we're going to get to a very, very, very famous sugya. It's always fun when those come up in the Daf Yomi. This is something that we'll see it more times in the Gemara. Also, a more in-depth version appears in Sanhedrin, but I'll keep you in suspense, and we'll see what it is in a minute or two. So first we start with something that's maybe a little less famous, which is Amar Rabbi Yaakov Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Bakol mitrapim chutz me'atzei ashera. You can use anything for medicinal purposes, meaning all these things we talked about that are forbidden to benefit from. If you need them for medicinal purposes, you're allowed, other than atzei ashera. Atzei ashera were trees that people use for idol worship. Okay, so now these are part of what we call the avizarim, the accoutrements to avodah zarah. It's not actually an idol, but it's something that they use in their idol worship. So you can't use atzei ashera for any kind of medicine. So hey chidami, the Gemara asks, what case are you referring to? There's two types of sick people. We learned this in Masechet Shabbat. There's sick people who are life-threatening danger, and there's sick people who are just a little sick and they're for sure going to get better, and we don't really have to worry so much about that. So if you're going to say it's life-threatening situation, then then of course anything, pikuach nefesh, it overrides everything in the Torah, right? If you're going to die from something, of course you can do it. And if there's no danger, then then you can't use anything that's forbidden to benefit from. If you're just a little bit sick and you have something minor, you can't, anything that's forbidden to benefit from, it's forbidden to benefit from. So let's say you need fruits, right? Juice, I don't know, to help you feel better. You can't use that if you're not in life danger, if they're orla, for example, right? If they're within the first 3 years of the tree, because that's forbidden to benefit from. So what on earth could this case be? So we need to find where specifically atzei asher was a problem and nothing else. So here comes our famous sugya. So now they say la'olam di'ika sakana. Really, it must be, it's a life-threatening situation. And yet you still can't use avodah zarah for this purpose. Okay, now we're going to learn that there's a limitation on what you can use to save your life. Titanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, it appears in the following brayta. Rabbi Eliezer says, Im ne'emar b'chol nafshecha, lama ne'emar b'chol ma'odecha. Im ne'emar b'chol ma'odecha, lama ne'emar b'chol nafshecha. If it says that you have to serve God, you have to love God with all of your life. So why does it need to say also with all your money? Obviously, if with all your life, it's going to include all your money. And if it says b'chol ma'odecha, why does it say b'chol nafshecha? If it says with all your money, why does it say with all your life? This second part is a little problematic because most people value their lives more than their money. Some people actually don't have this second part of the sentence, which makes more sense. It's basically saying the Torah should have just said the most severe thing, which is your life. So you should love God with all of your life. And therefore, it doesn't need to say both. So why does it say both? Right. Originally, it sounds like in the question, and again, this question is not 100% clear, but especially if we read both sides. But basically, the way Rashi reads it is that the Torah should have just stuck with whichever one is the thing that people would be less likely to give up on, okay, which would probably be our lives. So therefore, we're going to say it should have just said one of them. But what does it come to teach you? And now it comes to teach you that it's not as simple as you thought. If there's a person, which is most people, who value their life more than their money, that's why it says you have to give up your life. But some people, their possessions are more significant to them than their lives. And therefore, for those people, we wanted to say the most severe thing. And it's basically saying, right, there are some and some. Okay, who these people are, it's a good question, but there are some people that maybe you could say that's the case. So in any case, we're now going to say, because of this, what do you learn from here? That you have to, now what does this have to do with anything? Well, This is the commandment to love God. You have to love God with all your life, meaning you might have to give up your life to love God. What does it mean to love God? To believe in God and not to worship any other idols. And here we don't even mean worship idols. This is just using something that was meant for avodah zarah. You cannot use even to heal yourself, even if you're going to die from it. Even if you're in an endangered situation, you cannot do this. And this leads us to the next line, which is a very famous line, which is, okay, this is the less famous way of saying it, but here comes the big three. There's three things that you have to basically give up your life for. And those things are avodah zarah and gilui arayot, okay, not sleeping with someone that's forbidden, okay, if you're a married woman, not sleeping with someone else, or all kinds of arayot. There's a debate about whether this only includes ones that are, there's different arayot in the Torah. Some you get killed for, some it's only a lo taseh. Does it include all of them or only ones that you actually get killed for? Anyway, there's a debate about that. And shvichut damim and murder. Okay, so now we're going to see all these three things. Basically, if somebody puts a gun to your head and says, right, kill someone else, otherwise I'll kill you, you have to be killed and not kill the person. Okay, or, sleep with this person, otherwise I'm going to kill you. So if it's gilui arayot, then you're not allowed to. Okay, you have to give up your life. And likewise, avodah zarah. So the way he words it is a little different than the way it appears in Sanhedrin. In Sanhedrin, it appears yareg va'al yavor, right? You have to let yourself be killed and don't do it. Here, since our whole topic was, can you use it for medicine? Basically, you can't use these things if they're going to help you for medicinal purposes. I'm not sure how shvichut damim and gilui arayot would help you for medicinal purposes, but maybe someone will say, I'll give you medicine if you do this, maybe. Anyway, so now we're going to see the source for all these things. Avodah zarah, hadamaran. We already saw the source for avodah zarah. That was v'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, right? You have to love God and not worship idols with all your life. Gilui arayot u'shvichut damim. So where do we learn those two? So we're going to see the two are a bit intertwined. First, we're going to learn one from the other, and then we're going to have to say, well, where we learn the other from. Ditanya, Rebbe Omer. There's a very strange pasuk when it talks about rape in the Torah. It talks about the na'ara murasa. This is rape of a woman who is engaged to be married. Now, engaged to be married is not the way we talk about engagement nowadays. Engagement nowadays doesn't have any halachic relevance. The engagement they're discussing is what we do under the chuppah, which is the brachat erusin or kiddushin, which we do before we read the ketubah generally. The reading of the ketubah is just to separate between the two, the erusin and the nisuin, okay, the marriage itself, which are the sheva brachot. So the kiddushin is harayat mikudeshet, right? So now we're going to say here, it says when somebody is out in the field and he attacks this, he goes to this woman and he sleeps with her, she's an na'ara murasa, she's already engaged to someone, betrothed. Ki ka'asher yakum ish al re'ehu ritzacho nefesh, kain hadavar hazeh. Just as one stands up to murder someone, this is the same, okay? This is basic way of saying, right? The way we would say it in modern terms is, right, rape is a horrible thing, right? It's as if someone's trying to murder you, right? It's like I always remember learning in high school, rape is a crime of violence, right? It's not a sexual crime, it's a crime of violence. That's kind of what this verse is saying. The rabbis take it to mean something a little bit different. They see here that the Torah is saying that rape is like murder. Now, in what way is it like murder? So they say, what does a rotzeach have to do here at all? And now we're going to get off of our topic, because remember, we were trying to find yareg val yavor. Right now we're learning something else. It sounds like it's coming to say rape is like murder, but really we're going to flip it and say murder is like rape. Okay, now in what way? Mekish rotzeach l'na'ara murasa. We're going to say murder is like rape in this sense. And this is the famous, what we call din rodef. Okay, you all know it from when Rabin was assassinated and the whole thing about rodef, right? What's rodef? If someone's trying to kill someone else, you're allowed to kill them. So, ma na'ara murasa nitan latzila benafsho, af rotzeach nitan latzilo benafsho. Just like when there's an na'ara murasa and someone is going to rape someone, you're allowed to kill the rapist. Okay, they learn this. Rashi says, if you look in Dibur HaMatchil, nitan latzila, nitan reshut la ro'esh rodef achareha, shetzilena mimena benafsho sharodef. Okay, if I see, okay, ro'esh rodef achareha, I see that someone's chasing a woman to rape her, I can kill the rodef. How do we know this? Because it says in the verse there, ve'ein moshia la. Ein moshia la means there's no one to save her. And it describes the situation. It says there's no one to save her. So they derive from here, hayesh la moshia, if there was someone who could save her, tzarich loshia b'chol asher yachol, afilu b'harigato. So they derive from that verse that you can save that woman with anything, any means you need to, okay? You can even kill the person. Okay, now, by the way, right, the Rashi quotes, Im ein yachol latzil b'cha me'evarav. Okay, this is, by the way, if you can't shoot him in the leg and stop him, okay, you should try to shoot him in the leg first, but if you can't, you're allowed to kill the rapist. So now, okay, there's a whole debate here. We'll learn it much more in Sanhedrin. Some people say latzilo b'nafsho means you can save. What's lahatzilo? Right, so here it says nitan latzila b'nafsho. Some people say it's actually referring, I think in Sanhedrin, it appears nitan latzilo. You can save the rapist from doing the terrible crime of rape by killing him. Okay, there's different interpretations. Are we saving the woman or are we saving the rapist from his sinning? Anyway, it's a whole other debate. But now they say, so since Nara Morasa Nitan Lasilo B'nafsho, so now what do we learn from this? The whole idea was we're going to learn Rotzeach from Nara Morasa. Rotzeach, it sounded like it was coming to teach us something from a murder case to a rape case. But Nimtza Lamed, it really comes to teach us something, the reverse, which is just like an Nara Morasa, you can kill a rapist if you have to, if you have no other way to save her. Af Rotzeach Nitan Lasilo B'nafsho. Likewise, if someone's about to murder someone else, you're allowed to kill them also. You would have thought it was more obvious the murder case, but it's interesting that for them, it's more obvious the rape case. It's very interesting. Now, besides that we go in that direction, we also go in the typical direction. So now, right, I'm not going to get into, there's a whole thing, right, I see in the chat about if the woman's single, then the rapist is supposed to marry her. That's something different. That's also, it's very hard halacha to understand. She can also refuse to marry the rapist if she wants, but usually she's going to want to because in their society, it was a huge stigma if a woman was raped and no one would ever want to marry her. And that's why the rapist has to provide for her. It's also, I think, a disincentive clause for a rapist. Don't rape someone because you're going to end up having to marry them. That's a whole different issue. Here, we're talking more about Giloy Arayot. There, it's not such an issue of Giloy Arayot because a woman, until she becomes designated to someone, which is what happens at the Erusin, she's permitted to everybody. So there's not an issue of Giloy Arayot. It's just an issue that you shouldn't be raping someone and he gets fined and he has to marry her. It's sort of a responsibility for him. It's saying you now took on a responsibility. It's hard to view that whole thing in the light of rape, the way we view rape today, and societally based. I don't want to get into all that, but it's a whole other issue. So now they're going to do the reverse. They're going to learn something from murder to rape. What's that? Ma rotzeach yareg va'al yavol. Just like a rotzeach, if someone puts a gun to your head and says, kill someone else, you're not allowed to do that, which we're going to see why in a minute. We don't yet know why. Af nara morasa tereg va'al tavor. Likewise, a betrothed woman has to basically get killed and she shouldn't sleep with this man, right? If she has a choice, then she should let herself be killed. So that's how they learn nara morasa. And where do we learn that if someone puts a gun to your head and says murder someone else, that you're not allowed to do that? Svarahu, it's just logical. And on this logic, this sentence is what Daf Shalahem this week is all about. How do we choose the value of one life over another? It's a very famous section. There was a person who went in front of Rava with the following question. He said, Amarle, Mari Durai, Amarle Zil Kale Leplanya. He says, listen, the head of the city said to me, I have to murder someone, and if I don't, he's going to kill me. Amrle, likteluch velo tiktal. He says, you have to give yourself over to be murdered, and you're not allowed to murder. Why does he say so? My chazit didama didach sumak tfei. Why do you think your blood is any redder than the other person? Dilma dama dahu gavra sumak tfei. Maybe the blood of the other person is more red than yours, right? Even if he's a criminal, maybe he has some redeeming value. There's a great story in the Yerushalmi that Shirin Chamatal quote in Daphne Shalahen about some guy that owned a whorehouse, and basically he ends up saving the people by his prayer. And they say, how could that possibly be? And then he tells the story of something he did to help somebody, and that everybody has some redeeming quality, and therefore you can't basically decide your life is more important than somebody else's. This obviously raises a lot of questions. One of the main questions it raises is, what if they say we're going to kill many people if you don't kill one person, right? So then how do we value many lives versus one? Are we allowed to decide in that point? Is it a numbers game, or is it right? It's unclear. Okay, so this raises a lot of questions. It's a very interesting topic. And in Sanhedrin, by the way, I'll just mention, right, the Sheva ben Bichri story. It's exactly the Sheva ben Bichri story, which is which is mentioned in which is from the Navi. I'm not going to get into all the details because we're getting toward the end of of our time. But there's all sorts of questions, right? Also discussions of organ donations, who gets priority, right? These are very, very important, relevant questions. The other thing is that the Sugya in Sanhedrin mentions all sorts of other situations where you can't be Erek Val Yavor. It's not only necessarily these three. There's situations where one might actually not be able to do anything and has to give themselves over to be killed. You're going to have to wait till Sanhedrin till we get there a few years from now. Okay, or you can look it up yourself. Mar bar of Ashi. Okay, we're back to Isurei Hana'ah. Okay, benefiting from things. So Mar bar of Ashi, Eshkachei Ravina, he saw Ravina, that what was he doing? Deshayaf lebarte beguhar ke de orla. He took unripe olives, and he was rubbing from orla, okay, which are forbidden to benefit from, and he was rubbing them on his daughter's skin. She had some sort of something that was wrong. We don't know what yet, and he was rubbing it on her skin. So Amarle. So Mar bar of Ashi says to him, what are you doing? The rabbis only allowed it if her life was in danger, but your daughter doesn't look like she's in danger. So here's a good line. Amarle. So the first version is, Hi ishtetsamir tanami kashat sakana damya. You don't think this is life-threatening, but you know what? She has a fever, and we all know that fevers could get worse, and we don't know what's going to be from it. And theoretically, he says, this could be life-threatening. And that's always the question. Where do you draw the line between life-threatening and not life-threatening? Igad Amre, some people say Amarle, that what he said to him was, Midi derech hana'ah kavidna. I'm not using this in its typical manner. Nobody takes unripe olives and uses it for the oil. I'm using something in a very atypical manner. They wait until they ripen, they get the oil out, and then they use it. So therefore, it's allowed. Okay, Itmar. We're going to start this section now. We're going to see one version of this whole thing now, and then we're going to continue tomorrow with the second version. Itmar. Hana'ah, again, we're talking all about benefit. Now we're going to talk about, and it's similar to this Yehareg Val Yavol, Hana'ah haba lo la'adam ba'al korcho. What if somebody forces you to benefit from something? Okay, they shove food down your throat. Delicious chocolate cake. Okay, now there's many situations of someone shoving delicious chocolate cake down your throat. You could, okay, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but first we'll just see. Abai amar muteret. Abai says this is allowed. Let's say the chocolate cake was on Pesach, okay, and it was chametz, and they shove this chocolate cake down your throat. Rav amar asura. Rav says it's forbidden. So now, what's the scenario? 4 scenarios they set up. Efshar v'chamachaven. Theoretically, you could take the chocolate cake right out of your mouth, and you actually are enjoying that chocolate cake. If you could take it out of your mouth and you don't, and you enjoy that chocolate cake, of course it's going to be forbidden. Lo efshar v'chamachaven, or you can't take it out of your mouth, but you really are enjoying that chocolate cake. Kule amalo pligi dasur. Both of them agree for sure it's forbidden. Lo efshar v'lo machaven. What if you can't get it out of your mouth and you're not interested in eating chocolate cake? You're on a diet. You hate sugar. You don't enjoy chocolate cake at all. V'lo machaven. So kule amalo pligi dashari. Everyone agrees it's mutar because you're not getting any benefit from it. Ki pligi de efshar v'lo machaven. The machloket is the debate between the two of them. Abai says it's okay. Rava says it's not. Is when you can take it out and you don't, but you don't really want the chocolate cake. So I don't take it out of my mouth, but I really don't want this chocolate cake. I'm not enjoying it at all. So if that's the case, there's a machloket. And then according to the first, right, this is the first way of reading it. And it's all going to connect to intent. Who do we remember? Rabbi Yehuda, who says davar she'eino mitkaven is forbidden in Masechet Shabbat, and Rabbi Shimon, who says it's allowed. So now we're going to say, Aliba de Rabbi Yehuda, da'amar davar she'eino mitkaven asur, kule amalu pligi asur. According to this first reading, everyone agrees that according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it's davar she'eino mitkaven, it's forbidden, right? So everyone agrees it's going to be forbidden because we don't care. Your intent is irrelevant according to Rabbi Yehuda. But ki pligi aliba de Rabbi Shimon, the machloket is according to Rabbi Shimon, da'amar davar she'eino mitkaven mutar. Rabbi Shimon says, if you don't intend, then it's allowed. So then the machloket is according to Rabbi Shimon. Now, why would there be machloket? Rabbi Shimon should say it's mutar. So why would Rabbi say it's asur? Abai holds like Rabbi Shimon. The davar she'eino mitkaven is mutar, and therefore he says you're not intending. You don't want this. You're okay. The Rava Amar ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Shimon ela hecha de lo efshar. Aval hecha de'efshar lo. Rava says, Rabbi Shimon only said, now this is fascinating, and we saw this machloket also in Masechet Shabbat, I don't know if you remember, but it'll be good review, that the machloket with Rabbi Shimon is only, when Rabbi Shimon says davar she'eino mitkaven is allowed, it's only if it's not preventable. But if you can prevent it, okay, there's a whole debate. If you remember the classic cases, you're dragging your chair on the ground or a bed, and it makes a hole. Now, making a hole is a problem, but you're not intending for it to make a hole in the ground. So if there's a whole debate, is it only if it's so heavy that it can't be lifted up? And which means that if you can lift it up and it's avoidable, then you're going to be obligated according to Rabbi Shimon. That's what Rava says. Whereas Abaye thinks no. Even if it's avoidable, it doesn't matter. If you don't want that ditch that you're digging in the ground, then it's fine. Okay, so that's the first way of understanding them. And then tomorrow we're going to start with what's the second way of how to understand this machloket, Abaye and Rava. Chodesh Tov to everyone. Have a great day. Chanukah Sameach.